So thank you very much to those of you who come out on this beautiful day because you believe that literature and stories are important, in fact vital to what we do. And it's made my day. And everybody in the audience is special to me in a lot of ways. And you're special to me because you are hosting this event. So thank you very much. And over there, Catherine. Again, one of the wonders of literature is that it permits friendships to develop and to take root and to just grow in unexpected ways. So she read my book and loved it and said that she's from this part and that she'll like the audience from her, the area where she used to live to get to know me. So she facilitated the series of readings that I've been doing since Friday. So I'm really grateful. And then there is a special couple. And I encountered them near the bathroom. I was standing in line to use the bathroom. And the man called me aside and said, we're here to hear you. And he said, and let me tell you how important we are. He said, there was somebody who read yesterday and we were the audience. So I'm really delighted that you came back to go through yet another session of penance. It is what we call delicious agony. So thank you. And Nina right there is one of really the treasures of teaching for me, of the teaching career, is that you get to meet so many students. And if you are good at teaching, I think you would really confess, if it were possible for teachers to confess, that you learn more from your students than you ever teach them. And so Nina is one of those students from whom I learned a lot. And so Nina, you've been an extraordinary student. And the last time I was in the area, last January, you were in San Francisco to listen to me speak. That means you were not tired of all those sessions with me in the classroom at Trinity College. So I thank you, Nina, for coming out again. And then, before I was having my coffee, and then a beautiful woman walked up to me and said, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm halfway through one third of the way through your book, and I have questions. And, so she began to talk to me. And found out that she's reading Arrows of Rain. And she says that the story connects to her. That is a story that connects to her even though she's not from that culture. She happens to have traveled some in Africa. But she said this has nothing to do with why she's connected to the story. So you made my day. And thank you very much. And right there at the back is Ugo Ubidi. They're one of those friends that one has encountered from one's vocation as a writer. Ugo and I have talked for some time over the phone because he was reading my columns in Nigerian newspapers and so on. And so last year when I was coming to San Francisco, Ugo undertook to mobilize the Nigerian community in the area, and it was quite a turnout. And those of them who couldn't be at the bookstore, he arranged that they gave him money to buy books for them, which were then signed. So when I told him I was coming this time around, I didn't want to stay in a hotel. I wanted to eat home-cooked, spicy Nigerian meals every day. And I said, do you know somebody I should call? He said, why do you have to call somebody? You're staying with us. So I'm staying at his home, and his wife has really been spoiling me with great cooking, so thank you very much. All right. So this is what I do. I tell people that I'm an anti-reader, okay? When I was young, I enjoyed it when my parents read to me. Then I grew up and I could read for myself. I discovered the magic of reading. And so I no longer desire, nor do I particularly enjoy it when I go to a reading and an author opens his or her book and reads 20 pages of it. When that begins to happen, what goes through my mind is, when is this ordeal going to end? And so I don't inflict on people what I don't want to be done to me. So when I give readings, what I do essentially is to tell stories, which is what I do in class too, isn't it? So I'm going to tell you one or two stories. And I said that these stories are a way of introducing myself. Of course, I'm going to read, and I'm going to read from the two books as well. And I'm going to read like a sliver, you know, very short sections of the two books. But essentially, I like to tell you stories. These are the stories I'm working on now. I'm writing a series of essays based on my experiences in America. So let me tell you, I wonder which one I should start with. There's a story about my arrest for bank robbery. Yeah. You know, people see me and they recognize quickly that I'm independently wealthy, right? So they wonder, how did he come by all this money? And part of the story is that I arrived in this country and robbed a bank quickly. So I could tell you that story. I could also tell you of my ride on the back of a crocodile. So that's another story that is worth telling. But I also could tell you a story that I call Going Dutch. Which one would you vote for? Because this is a democracy. I said that I have veto powers, you see. Yeah.
All of them.
All of them. Why not? Why not? Okay. So let's sort of give quick rundown, a quick synopsis of these stories. So before I came out to this country, my parents and my uncles and aunts decided that they should hold, if you like, a last lesson for me to ensure that the paths were cleared for me and that they would give me the requisite advice that I needed for my journey through this great American wasteland. And so there were all kinds of advice from different quarters. But an uncle of mine said to me, okay, when you get to America, make sure you don't make eye contact with Americans. And he said to me, every American carries a gun. And so if you look them in the face, they're going to think you are being provocative and they will shoot you. Well, this uncle of mine had never been to America. But what happened was that in those days, from time to time, a movie will be shown in public, usually in a football field. You know, football, right? Football, you know what football is, right? Real football, the one you kick. Yeah, not the handball that Americans call football. Yeah. So, and these movies were usually westerns, right? So, and there were old black and white affairs where there was all this graininess to the picture, and there was a gap between the movement of the lips of the characters and the sound of the voice. So there was this great disparity. So we didn't know what they were saying, the characters, but somehow at some pivotal climactic moment in the movie, usually in a bar, the characters will waddle to the center and face each other and stare each other down. And that became the signal that they were soon going to pull guns from both sides of the hip and start shooting. So from this experience, my uncle formed the impression that the worst thing you could do to an American was to make eye contact. So he said, don't look them in the face when you get there. And I promised not to. And so, you're welcome to join us. Do you have something better?
Sorry.
Okay. I mean, you never know when people have something better to do. So I came to, so my uncle then said, don't look Americans in the face. So I arrived in this country determined not to make eye contact with Americans. Well, so 4 days after I arrived here, an adjunct professor at UMass, Amherst, where I lived in Amherst at the time, told me that he wanted me to meet this African-American woman who wanted to go to Nigeria, and that I needed to speak with her to give her advice. So I met in his office with this woman, and it turned out that her mother had refused to discuss her paternity or her life, but suddenly the woman was dying of cancer, and told the daughter that the only thing she knew about her paternity was that her father was a graduate student from Nigeria at Fordham University, and she dated the man and she got pregnant. The man finished 1 degree and said, I'm going to go quickly to Nigeria, I'll return and we'll get married and blah, blah, blah. The man traveled to Nigeria, she never saw him again. So she was so resentful that she refused to discuss the man. But dying, finally she told the daughter. And this was the days when a lot of African Americans believed that there were kings and queens and princes and princesses in Africa. And so she was going to go back. These were the days of Coming to America by Eddie Murphy. So this grand illusion, this fantasy that we were all kings and queens. And so she wanted to go to her very, princess-like reception in this African, oil-rich African country. So she went to this Nigerian professor, and he proposed that she talk with me, so I advised her. So here we were for at least an hour and a half. She had questions, and I kept answering the questions. Then after a while, she said to me, have you had lunch? I said, no. She said, why don't we go and eat? Now, in Nigeria, point of cultural information, in Nigeria, and I'm sure in Uganda, you noticed that was true as well. If somebody says to a group of friends, let's go and eat, you imply an offer to buy everybody their meal, okay? And so, but of course in Nigeria, women would not buy a man a meal, or much of anything else. It's not just done. But I said to myself, this is an American woman. They are quote unquote liberated, see? So I said, wow, I'm meeting my first generous American. So we went to a restaurant, and through the meal she kept asking questions. And after a while I got tired. I should have said, hey, it's all right, I've answered all your questions that are important. But I said, I have to be polite, this woman is buying me a meal. But the waiter came and put the check equidistant between us, almost as if she didn't want either of us to have unfair advantage. But in my mind, I said, I was invited to eat. Payment was her responsibility. So at length, she said to me, we gotta go. I said, eagerly, yes. So she pointed to the bill. I said to myself, this country has something strange called winter. See? So maybe they have even stranger custom, that before they pay for you, they want you to know how much they're paying. So I made a point of looking at the bill for a second, and I turned to the woman and said, thank you. So she ignored me, asked me a few more questions, and said again, we gotta go. I said, yes. So she pointed again to the check. She's now bringing her purse. So I said, well, maybe in America, before they pay for you, the custom is that you raise the bill so that they see that they know, so that they know that you've seen how much they're paying. So I picked it up and looked at it for a moment and put it back down, and I said, thank you. At which point she swept it up, and using her finger to underscore the point, she says to me, you owe $4.75 plus tip. Well, again, point of cultural information. In Nigeria, we don't do tip. In fact, what we do is that we argue over how much you're going to pay. So you go to a restaurant, the meal is $10, you say, look, this meal wasn't even tasty, I'm giving you only $6. And they say, okay, bring 8. You say, I'm giving you 7 last. You know, so the whole idea of paying more than the price on the, was a cultural novelty to me. Anyway, but I had even a graver problem because I didn't have a dime to start with. I had come to eat without a dime in my pocket. So I got up. I didn't know how to tell this woman at that point that I thought she was buying me a meal. So I got up and began to search my pocket for money I knew wasn't there. And this was a bad day for miracles. There was no miracle that day. So no extraterrestrial force had put money in my pocket. So finally I said to her, why don't you pay? And I think I left my money at the office of the Nigerian professor where we met initially. So I said, let's go back there and I'll give you my portion. So she paid. But from the expression on her face, she must have felt that I was the world's most contemptible freeloader, which was fine because I thought even worse of her. So as we walked back to the professor's office, we walked in stunning, loud silence. So we got there. Luckily for me, the professor was in his office. So I said to him, could I see you for a moment? So he came out. I said, could I borrow $10? Now, again, point of cultural information. If you're Nigerian and your Nigerian friend says to you, could I borrow money? It's not a loan. It means give me the damn money. You see? So the professor gave me $10, knowing that money wasn't ever coming back to him. So with money in my hands now, I felt confident enough to deliver cultural education. So I called the woman and I said to her, in my country, if you invite somebody to eat, you imply you're going to pay for it. So I thought that was what was happening. She said, oh no, we don't do like that in America. I said, I just found out. So I said, here, take $10. I'm paying for both of us for today. But please make sure you don't invite me any other time unless you're going to pay. So she took the money and ran. Then I went back to the professor and I said, do you know why I needed to borrow $10? He said no. So I told him the story. And he laughed for so long and he said to me, okay, Americans call it going Dutch. So I said to him, I'm going to continue to go Nigerian. So since then, whenever a friend has invited me out to lunch or dinner, especially American friends, I'll say to them, there's a story, and I'll tell them the story. At the end of which I'll say that the moral of the story is that I'm offering to pay unless you insist. And often, in the interest of full disclosure, they like the story so much they say, we're going to pay for you. Then 10 days after I came here I was at the bus stop in the center of Amherst. And the police officer was passing in his vehicle, and he and I made eye contact. I remembered my uncle's entreaty not to look Americans in the face, so I quickly made a dramatic gesture of looking away. Well, from the corner of my eye, I saw the police officer turn into a side street. But about a minute or two later, I got a tap on the shoulder, and I whirled around, and here was somebody in uniform, tall man. So he said to me, sir, do you mind coming to the back of the bus stop? In Nigeria, no police officer, indeed nobody in uniform at all, will use the phrase, the word sir for you, and won't use the phrase, do you mind? They push or pull you where they want you. If they're in uniform, they have power. And so, but for a moment, I thought there was cultural disorientation. I thought that since this man called me sir, that he was being very deferential. And that since he said, do you mind, that I had a choice in the matter. That I could say to him, I'm in a hurry, I can't see you now, right? But on second thought, I said, let me make his acquaintance, he's genial. So we come to the back of the bus stop, and he folded his hands, and said to me, sir, you know what this is about, right? I said, no. He said, are you sure you don't know? I said, I don't know. Of course, I knew what it was about. What was it about? I knew that I had made eye contact. That was my crime. But I wasn't going to admit it. Because if I did admit it, then this man could shoot me. So my policy was one of absolute, permanent denial. So finally the officer said to me, well, sir, there's been a bank robbery and you fit the description. So I said, whoa. So I began to explain to him that I had just arrived 10 days before, that I had not been inside the bank, I had not opened an account, that if I was going to rob a bank, I need to know more where to buy the guns and where to buy the masks. And of course I wasn't, so there was no moment of levity, only moment of sweating, denial, and alibi. So I told him I've not been inside the bank. So later I added the, I'll know where to buy a gun, because it became funny after the event. As it was happening, it was the most terrifying experience in my life. So finally the officer said, do you have identification? I said, no. He said, why not? I said, because the only form of ID I had at the time was my passport. I didn't think it was safe to carry it wherever I went. So he said to me, do you mind if I frisk you? Frisk was not part of my vocabulary at the time. But I knew somehow that whatever frisk meant, yeah, we're both foreigners, right? I knew that whatever frisk meant, that I didn't have a choice. So I said, I don't mind. And he asked me to throw my hands up and patted me down, convinced that I had no weapons of mass destruction. He said to me, do you mind if I drive you to your apartment? I would like to see your passport. So I said, I didn't mind. So he drove me to my apartment, and Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian novelist, who wrote Things Fall Apart, the most widely read novel by any African. His two younger children were students at UMass at the time and were staying with me for their Christmas vacation. So I walked in and an Igbo said to them, "I've been arrested for bank robbery." But I went up to my room and got my passport and showed it to the officer, and he had a small machine and he punched a few things there. 10 minutes later, he was now convinced that I wasn't the man they were looking for. So he gave me back my passport and said, "Thanks for being a gentleman." And he was about to leave. But I said, "Excuse me, sir." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you mind dropping me back at the bus stop?" Because now I had seen there was a huge crowd when he picked me up. And I knew that there would be a narrative in town, in Amherst, that I'll walk around and people will point to me and say, "This guy is some kind of criminal. We saw a police officer arrest him." So I wanted there to be a countervailing narrative where people would say, "We saw an officer drop him off at the bus stop. So, maybe he's just a friend of officers, right? They pick him up and they drop him off at home." So the officer said, "No problem." He dropped me at the bus stop. And I arrived at the office of the Nigerian professor, and he wasn't in his office. So I assumed he was in class. About an hour later, he stormed into his office looking very disheveled and rather disenchanted. And then he saw me and stopped in shock. He said, "How did you get here?" I said, "I've been waiting here for more than an hour." But what happened was after I had forgotten to tell the Achebe children that I've been released. So they called me and said, "Okey's been taken away for bank robbery." So he got in his car and ran to the police station, and I said, "No, we don't have any such person, that name." And he went to another police station and they said, "No, we don't have him." So he called the Achebes and said, "Are you sure he was with an Amherst police officer?" They said, "Yes." So he went back to the police and said, "Did I turn up?" They said, "No." And he told them he had two witnesses, that an officer from Amherst police arrested me and that he was going to go call an attorney. So he was coming back to his office. These were the days of the Rolodex, right? To look through the Rolodex and call an attorney. And meanwhile, I've been waiting for him there. So these are some of the stories that I'm writing now in this, the story of my life in America, as it were. I don't call it a memoir because there isn't that they are simply episodes from my life, and there are so many hilarious episodes, so many funny stories about my name, that would be for if you invite me on a different occasion. Right? So let me talk quickly about to start with the children, the creative children in the order in which they were born. So Arrows of Rain was born first. After I came to this country, the magazine that Chinua Achebe invited me, by the way, Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian novelist, was the person who brought me to this country to set up African Commentary magazine. So the magazine did very well, was chosen by the Library Journal as one of the best 16 new publications that came out in this country in 1989, out of 584 new publications, and they chose us as the best news feature magazine. But we did not get advertising, so ultimately the magazine went under. So after I did, I was caught in a quandary. I had left a thriving career as a journalist in Nigeria to come here and set up this magazine. So what was I to do? So one day, John Edgar Whiteman, who was one of our columnists and one of my most fascinating writers, American writers, ran into me in town in Amherst and said to me, "So what are you going to be doing next?" I said, "I hadn't figured it out." So looking me in the face, he said to me, "You are writing a novel, right?" I wasn't writing a novel. But the way he asked the question, I felt that the imperative was to give an affirmative answer. So I said, "Yes, I am." So he said to me, "Get me 15 to 20 pages of it, and let me see if I could get you fellowship to do your MFA at UMass," where he was a professor in the MFA department, MFA program. So I spent the next several days writing furiously, without a sense at all whether what I was writing could be properly called fiction. All I knew and all I could fall back on was that I had read a lot of novels from Nigeria and through school and through my professional career, but I had not written a novel, had not written a short story. But here I was writing. And for me, the product, the end result, the outcome has shaped my pedagogy as a professor, because I see my role in the classroom as unlocking for students or helping students to unlock what they didn't know that they knew. See, students know so much, but they don't have the confidence to know that they know what they know until the classroom, as it were, germinates or opens the door for that germination of ideas, which were always there. And so when I gave John Edgar Wideman what I had produced, he read it and loved it so much, and said it reminded him of the writing of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who is an extraordinary writer from Kenya, and somebody who's been mentioned as a top contender for the Nobel Prize in the last 3 or 4 years. So it was rather flattering. So that original piece became my novel, Arrows of Rain. And Arrows of Rain for me, when I came to writing Arrows of Rain, I wanted to look at a subject, the twin subjects of power and silence. Power and silence. There were 2 provocations for that exploration. One was my reading of a prison memoir by a Nigerian writer, Wole Soyinka, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986. Wole Soyinka was in prison during the Nigerian Civil War because of his principled opposition to that war. And so the federal government locked him up and kept him mostly in solitary confinement. And he wrote this memoir on tissue paper as well as the foil from cigarette package. And so Soyinka, in that prison memoir, has the line that goes, a story that must be, come on, I'm quoting myself. The man dies in all who keeps silent in the face of tyranny. Soyinka proposed in that book. Years later, I came to this country and stumbled on this drama of Antigone by Sophocles, a great Greek dramatist. And in that story, I encounter Antigone, a young woman who defies King Creon to bury her brother against the decrees of the king, who said that the brother should not be buried, but that his remains should be abandoned to be picked by carrion, because he had joined an invading external force to invade his own city and perished in that effort. But the woman says, no, I owe my brother last filial duties, to give him the last rites, to bury him properly. And she also says to the king at her trial, what constitutes her trial in the drama, that what she's done is consistent with filial duty, that is consistent with what the gods would expect her to do. And finally, that most of the people in the community, in fact, are behind what she's done. But of course, the drama then is that the community is unable to muster the courage to stand up to their king and say, this woman did the right thing. So silence in the face of power, silence, moral cowardice that produces silence, was one of the subjects in that story. So I'm going to read you a quick section. This is my copy. I'm going to take my copy, and I'm going to read you a short section where my protagonists, oh, by the way, so I was saying 2 days ago when I spoke at San Francisco State University about my investment in empowering my students to speak. And I did say that one day I saw a sticker on a car, and it so moved me. It's the only sticker that I've seen on a car that I ever loved, see. And that sticker says this: speak your mind, even if your voice shakes. And so I spoke about this 2 days ago, about on Thursday, I think, at San Francisco State University. And today, Catherine found this and brought it to me. So that's really amazing. So thank you, Catherine. So it is therefore a stipulation against silence when speech is imperative. We must speak. And so we see the exchange between the grandmother in this story, who is speaking to her grandson, who is a journalist, and who's just started his career as a journalist and has come home to see his father dying, and his father dies in his hands, And I wrote this as a fantasy because my father, whom I really admired, was dying when I was writing this novel. And I fantasized that I'll be there and hold him in my hands as he died. But I wasn't so lucky. My elder brother was there and held him as he died. So I can't read the section where he died because I sometimes break down, you know, it's so personal to me. But after his death, his grandmother talks to him just before he returns to his duty, and she's going to speak about silence and stories and the importance of telling stories. After the last consoler left, she cleared her throat. This is the grandmother now clearing her throat to speak to her grandson. Chukwu is the Igbo word for God. When Chukwu first created the world, death was a man with two eyes. In those days, death would call back to Chukwu's house only those men and women who had done their work in the world, people who had attained old age. But one day, death came to call home a strong medicine man. The Ndibe was at that moment expecting delivery of a container of palm wine by the best tapper in the whole village. The old rogue begged Death to give him another day, but Death refused. He then asked Death to tarry and taste of the wine before doing his work. Again, Death said no, that he had too much work for that day, and that wine would only confuse his eyes. In anger, the medicine man cast a spell of blindness over Death. Since then, Death has taken away whoever he feels with his cold hand. That is why some children these days die before their parents. If Death were not blind, then your father would have been here speaking these words to you, and I'll be the one in the grave. But we cannot go and ask Death why he snatched away your father. People say that when a young man is not well girt and goes to inquire about what happened to his father, then what happened to his father will also claim him. Your father spoke to you before he went on his journey. You did not hear him. Do you know why? Because young men of today have lost the things of old. You no longer hear the language of things not said with words. Your father did not follow death like a lame man. He first wanted to know that you can stand in the world like a man. You must always remember that you come from a long line of speakers. Your grandfather was a town crier for all of Amorville. Your own father could have succeeded in, but he grew up in the age of the white man's rule. So he went to the white man's country and learned to become a new kind of voice, one that was heard far beyond Amorville. The journalist's father, who just passed away, was a broadcaster, radio broadcaster. Now you, a child of yesterday, have joined the line. You have begun to do what your father did and his father before him. What you scratch on paper can go and give a headache to a big man. You make powerful men stay awake at night. Don't fear any man, but fear lying. Remember this, a story that must be told never forgives silence. A story that must be told never forgives silence. Speech is a mouth's death to a story. You came from good loins. Your mother's breast was not sour when you drank from it. Let the things your mother and father taught you be your language in the world. With her hand shaking, because this woman is blind, so with her hand shaking, trace the contours and features of my face. As though pleased with what her fingers detected, she smiled. So I'm going to stop. That's my small reading from this book. And I'm going to read you an equally short section from Foreign Gods, Inc. So Foreign Gods, Inc. tells the story of a Nigerian student who has come to this country and has studied economics at Amherst College. And his expectations is that he's going to get a good corporate job. Instead of which he finds out that there are so many stumbling blocks. One of them is that he needs a green card. So to get a green card, he marries a woman who is beneath his station, but the only person who would agree to marry him for a green card. So he goes through this rather very, very abusive relationship with a woman. There's a divorce now. The man is facing, he's lost all his savings to both the lawyers and to the woman, and he's facing pressures from his mother to help, send money his widowed mother back home, which is what immigrants face. You know, not just African immigrants, but immigrants from Asia and from Europe and elsewhere. And so finally, he's taken to drinking and he's taken to gambling. And you know, he's been driving cabs for about 13 years to pay his bills, and he's not happy. He wants a corporate job. But whenever he applies for interviews, he's invited because his degree is good. He's on paper. But when he shows up, he speaks, and he has a particularly strong accent. And that becomes the sort of mode of differentiation and the reason that he's excluded from jobs. So in the end, he reads about this gallery called Foreign Gods, Inc. in New York City that buys and sells sacred objects and gods, pushed, stolen from different parts of the world. And he's tempted to go on what is his ultimate gamble, to steal the deity in his village that used to be the god of war for his people in pre-colonial times, and to sell it to this gallery. So the novel follows him on this journey back home to steal the deity and in the US. And so you find out what happens. So I'm not going to spoil it for you. But there's a backstory. The moment when the first European missionary, British missionary, appears in this village, and his name is Walter Stanton, and his very consuming obsession is to convert every villager to Christianity. And he flagellates himself because he feels, he gets some comfort, but he feels everybody should come follow my own God. But too many of the villagers are still holding out, still following this deity, this god of war. And so, so this is a section where some of even the converts are asking him very irritating questions. You know? So during one session, so still Reverend Stanton was often grieved by the converts' heresies and ways. In turn, the converts were vexed by aspects of the new religion that sounded contentious, if not outright nonsensical. During one session, Reverend Stanton's interpreter told the converts that the founder of the white man's religion was a bearded man god born in Bethlehem by a virgin. The converts did not find the idea of a born god hard to swallow. After all, the deities in Otonke were carved by sculptors and then infused by men or women powerful in Ogo. But born by a virgin, one convert whispered to another. Both men shrugged, bemused. The white man knows many things, the other whispered back, but he doesn't know how to tell a good lie. Sometimes the converts voiced their doubts. One day the interpreter said the new Godfather lived up in the sky, far beyond the clouds, beyond the reach of eyes. He said this divine Father was so huge his feet lolled all the way down from the sky to rest on the earth. He then claimed that the missionary's God was present everywhere. Our people too have Chukwu, the great God who lives in the sky, one baffled convert said. Everywhere we see the signs of his work. The drifting clouds are smoke from his pipe. Rainfall is his sneeze. All great rivers were born from his spittle. Wherever he scuffed his feet, mountains arose. Valleys were formed wherever he stamped his feet. Chukwu is mighty, but we never say that he's everywhere. His home is in the sky, and he hardly leaves his hut to visit the earth. He comes down to peer around only when something big happens in the world. And when he comes, nobody waits to be told. New mountains, valleys, and rivers are born, as you see around here. That was during one of those visitations, you see. The earth shakes with rain, the likes of which no one has seen in ages. If your own God lives everywhere, then why haven't my two eyes seen him? The interpreter explained the question to the missionary. It's because the true and living God is invisible, Reverend Stanton explained. For a moment, the curious convert was silent, but his face wore an incredulous expression. How can something be everywhere and yet invisible, he asked finally. His creator, maker of everything, with him everything is possible. He can do and undo, came Stanton's response. Then he should do to make himself visible, the convert suggested. Why not tell him to appear to us in his body? Then all our brothers and sisters will leave their ways and come and follow him. We can't tell God what to do, the missionary explained. I'm not saying tell him. Take a sacrifice to him and beg him, said the convert. It is through sacrifice that gods are deceived. Our God cannot be deceived, Stanton explained with visible impatience. He knows everything, including the secrets of our hearts. You deceive your own so-called gods because they are not gods at all, only phantoms. True Christians accept God's wisdom. It's not given to us to behold God in body, only as spirit. Ngene too is a spirit. Ngene is a deity, the local deity. Ngene too is a spirit, but he also has a body, insisted the convert. Its spirit is buried in the river, but you can see its body at the shrine. Stanton scratched at his neck, leaving splashes of reddened skin. His words stumbled out fast. What you call Ngene is nothing. It's a lie with which you've imprisoned yourself. It doesn't live in the river, nor does it own the river. Our God owns everything. He made your river and also the wood Ngene was carved from. The convert's face showed confusion. All these years, our fathers and forefathers made sacrifices to Ngene. They gave it yam and cocoyam. They offered it chicken and goat. In fact, when their hands were strong with wealth, they brought cows to a shrine. When their wives had new babies, or when their farms had increased, they went to the shrine to say, Dalo to Ngene. We too learn to do what our fathers and forefathers did. As soon as we stopped suckling our mother's breast, we were taught the secrets of the river. We learned that the river belongs to Ngene, that a God spirit lives in that river. Are you saying then that Ngene stole the river from your deity? If the river belonged to your God all along, why did he send a diviner to tell our forefathers and us about it? That's why we are here, the missionary explained. We've come to tell you about the God who made all things. We've brought you the good news of the one true, indivisible God. We're here to spread the word about he who alone sits in the mantle of glory. I still have one question that scratches my inside, the inquisitive convert said with a mischievous glint in his eye. Ask it, the missionary invited eagerly. Does your God owe money to another God? Perplexed, Stanton asked, what do you mean? I still don't understand why your God likes to be invisible. Around here, those who take to hiding are men who don't wish to pay their debts. An edge of exasperation nudged away Stanton's eager expression. Fixing the interpreter with a glare, he spoke in a slow, halting manner. Tell them to get it into their thick heads once and for all that there aren't other gods besides the one we worship. Tell them that our God can't owe anybody because he owns everything in heaven and on earth. Tell them that he is invisible because he is holy. Tell them that we're all tainted sinners, corrupted by the original sin of our first parents, Adam and Eve, who ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. Tell them that because all have sinned and come up short, our eyes can't see God in flesh and blood. Tell them that nobody who beholds God can live to tell about it. Tell them finally that there will be no more questions today. Thank you. Oh my gosh, I know I've taken a long, long time. It's been meandering, but that's me. So thank you for coming out. I'll take questions. I'll take suggestions to edit the book. Yeah. I'll take conversations. Yes.
Did he say that sacrifice is a deception?
No. An Igbo expression, because I'm trying to carry the burden of the Igbo language in English. So the Igbos have an expression that sacrifice is how you deceive a God. Basically, it says that sacrifice is how you get, it's like how our children come to us when they want something. They say, please, please, Dad, please, please, So when you offer a sacrifice to a deity, you sort of make the deity do what perhaps the deity doesn't feel disposed to do, right? So the Igbo then have an expression that you use sacrifice to deceive a deity, but it's not deceive, it's not deception in that sense of of misleading. It's just a way of whittling, cajoling, drawing out the deity to do your wishes, to bless you in your undertaking. But sacrifice becomes the instrument that you use to get that. Yeah.
You know, 44 years ago or something, when I was in college at Indiana University.
No, you were not in college 44 years ago.
It was. My heroes were Chinua Achebe, Walusha Yinka, and Sende Usman.
Oh my gosh.
And their literature imbued in me a compassion that changed the way I experienced my own work. And one of the things that seems to me really, you know, I am approximately halfway through this. But, and I did say to you, I feel that it's a universal discussion of power and hidden characteristics and those things. But one of the things I really liked about it that I also found in these other authors was the quick circling, and it's fast. It's much faster, and it's quick interlocking circles that frame up the issues that become lively through the fiction, the things you're raising, in a most wonderful way, that make it very, very readable and exciting to the reader. To me. This is not only halfway through, and I have this, from very early on, I had this distinct experience of the way you weave the story.
Yes.
And I'm really appreciating that.
Oh, thank you. Are you a professor? You teach, you talk about literature formally?
No.
You don't? Well, because you spoke beautifully. What you detect in the story, I come from a tradition of where storytelling is integral in the culture. And I was immersed in stories as a child. And so every day when we had dinner, because we didn't have the lock of the television, or the ill lock of the television, I'll say. So my parents, or some uncle or aunt, or some older cousin, will regale the children with a folk tale or with some story. And usually the storyteller will sit on a stool, and we, the children, will sit on the floor and ring sort of in a kind of semicircle or circle. And I was enchanted by that experience growing up. And it was years later, when I became a writer, that I realized that in those folk tales were already all the elements that you need in a story. And were all the ways in which you shape a story, and in which you shape your experience, in which you draw out that drama, that moral drama, that is often, in my view, the greatest mission and the greatest discipline and the greatest beneficence of fiction, you see. So that informs the way that I write. And so you talk about this cyclical movement, and that is always there, and is there consciously and also unconsciously. But it's something that one imbibed as a child, you know, growing up, and has, of course, come to become part of the formal and conscious economy, narrative economy that one deploys when one writes. So it's just so beautiful when you encounter somebody who has engaged with the literature and who has a sense of the history of that literature, and therefore recognizes all these wars, what we call great time, you know, that everything is implicated at once, you know, that the animate and inanimate collaborate in wonderful ways, and so in my culture, in Foreign Gods, for example, a stone becomes a character at one point in the story, you know. So Ike's uncle says to him, Ike is a young man who's going to steal the deity, says to him, go and get me a piece, you know, a stone, and he brings it and he says, is this alive or dead? And that becomes a moment for a great philosophical conversation with his uncle, who happens to be the chief priest of the deity he's gone home to steal, you see. Yeah. But yeah, so what you said is so beautifully put, that you should be teaching African literature somewhere.
Well, what you say there this brings more conversation in terms of your new book, which I haven't read. What is the story of the
But
journey
you will
here?
read it, right? Yeah.
One of the problems that because Western Africa, and I know about that some, the nature of the stories that people are told, and this, what you're talking about, creates this ability for this sort of narrative, which creates a problem here. Because we are very straightforward, so if you weave a story like that, where you're telling what happened to you, something, and you weave it like that, people, they don't want to believe you because it is not credible to them. And this is a tremendous problem for people from Africa and from other cultures where this is true.
Yes.
Lack of credibility with people they meet.
Yes.
Very, I don't know if this comes up in there, but it's a very brutal thing for people who come from these tender places of your grandmother telling you this.
Yes. And that's, again, actually there's a novel I have in the works which I call Native Tongues, which is going to actually implicate what you just said even more powerfully, which is going to be the sort of the, you'll see different narrative modalities sort of clashing. It tells the story of an American anthropologist who was doing research in an African village and disappears. And his family hires one of the great private detectives to go find out what happened to him. And she arrives in this African village with a sense, you know, sort of that sense that we have in the world, that Africans are simpletons, you know, I'm going to find out what happened in a second, you know, by just talking to them. They're like children, they're childlike, right? And so this detective comes and quickly establishes who she thinks are suspects, and she begins to talk to them using an interpreter. So on one occasion, she says to somebody who is a suspect to her, she says, when was the last time you saw the protagonist? And the man uses a proverb, which in Igbo says, Ola Polizu Abulgonu, which means a sleep that has lasted for a week is death. It is a culturally specific and clear and precise way of saying, it's been a long time since I last saw him. But this American who is not used to it says, aha, this one is hiding something. No, there's nothing being hidden. This is, so if I see, if I stay in this area for a month, and I run into a Nigerian friend at a party and he said, okay, when did you come? I could say, instead of saying a month ago, I could say, the sleep that has lasted a week is death. It's a way of saying, I've been here a while. And nobody will say, hey, you're dodging, you're being evasive. But of course, this American detective says, I've got my man, he's dodging me, right? He's being evasive, he's being dodging. So you see, in this novel, that tension of cultural translation becomes central to the drama of the novel. So that's one of the works that I have occupying my head at the moment.
I'm looking forward to it.
Please.
Brilliant.
Yes. Yeah. Nina.
Question?
Well, you asked all the questions in class, right?
I was going to ask, you write so much journalism, you also write fiction. What is the process of each mean to you? What does it do for you in terms of the way you're translating and telling stories and book prompts?
Yeah, I always see myself, everything you do, for me, is a process of telling stories. So when again, last night we met this, my host took me to this Nigerian event, and once he introduced me, there was some kind of, great excitement, and this professor of law at Golden Gate, that's Golden Gate, right? Mm-hmm. Golden Gate University. Said, oh, I was looking at you and you resembled, okay, but I didn't want to believe it, that you were in town and so on and so forth. So he insisted that we come home today for lunch, so we went. But he says, look, I look forward to reading your columns every week because I can't put it down, right? And it's the same sort of, I see writing, any kind of writing, as an act of seduction. So when I'm writing a column, I want somebody to read the first sentence and not want to drop it until they finish the entire column. When I'm writing a book, I want somebody to walk into a book and say, let me look at the first sentence. And to be so intrigued by the first sentence that you want to read the first paragraph. And by the time you're done, you want to read the whole first page. By the time you're done with the first page, you want to read the first chapter, and then you read the entire book, an act of seduction. So the storytelling mode, the same way that we were enchanted, we were seduced by that storyteller who said to us, I have a story, I have a story to tell you. And we, the children, would say, tell us that story. Let it be a sweet story. And we're going to be attentive and listen to the story you've got to tell. And our entire day found culmination in that moment when that storytelling happened, right? So, but of course, there are differences in temper when you're writing a column. You said there's an immediacy. Something has happened in Nigeria today. I'm responding to it in my column. I'm trying to analyze it. I'm trying to stake out a position. When I'm writing a novel, and I'm setting the novel in Nigeria, I'm using some of that same material that I use in my column, but the treatment is different, essentially. It has to be essentially. Because you want to use some language, and you want to enter the material from a particular position, that makes it enduring beyond the data that perhaps inspired whatever you're working with. But you also don't want to bring in sort of the kind of impatience that I bring in when I talk about what I call the tragedy of Nigeria, a nation conceived in hope but nurtured into hopelessness by its leaders. See? So when you talk about corruption, you don't want to beat people on the head. In my columns, I'm very denunciatory when I talk about corruption. But corruption in the novel makes you laugh, and then you catch your breath in horror. You say, whoa, this is something terrible happening here. But the writer has to knead that material in a way that makes it digestible to somebody, because when we come to fiction, we want delectation. We want pleasure, finally. But we also want the kind of pleasure that unsettles us. So that is there. But the pleasure of the reading has to be primary. Otherwise, everything else will fail if you're working on it. Yeah.